Tonight's lesson is on something called proxy records, which is probably a new term for you. Let's have a look at what proxy records are. So what are they? First of all, proxy records are usually physical objects from whatever time period you're trying to study. They will directly store information, meaning they'll store a molecule, a physical object, which tells you something very directly, or they're going to require that you do a comparison between whatever the stored information is and something that is a modern equivalent of the same thing. For an example, let's look at the concept of a tree ring. We know that trees grow every year. Every year they add a ring to their trunk and they get larger, and the size of that ring stores unique information about that particular growing season. So they contain direct information. So for example, if there was a volcanic eruption nearby, there would be some ash stored in that ring because it would get embedded in the bark, and that would become part of that tree's ring. Similarly, you might have to do a comparison with a modern species. So if you have a piece of wood from 1,000 years ago that happens to be an oak, then we look at a modern day oak for comparisons to say, well, an oak living under these conditions will grow like this. So that ring thickness can be used to infer things like temperature or precipitation. And that means that we can look at either a specific year by looking at a specific ring, or we can infer the entire climate based on how that tree grew over a multi-year period. Moving on in 3, 2, 1. Now let's talk about what proxy records are not. What aren't they? Well, they're not written or oral records. That's not saying written or oral records are bad. It's just that they aren't proxy records. They also can't be statements about what we think is happening. So it's not an inference. You can't say what you think is happening. So some examples. Newspapers, books, journals, any of this kind of stuff, they are good sources of information. Sometimes they provide valuable and accurate information, but they aren't proxy records. And one of the reasons why they sometimes aren't considered ideal is they often contain a bias from the person who's doing the writing. And they might also reflect a limited time frame, and depending on how far back we're looking, that limited time frame may or may not be appropriate. Alternatively, some can say, well, sea level used to be lower, and they'll claim that that's a record. Well, that's not a record. Saying that the sea level was lower, the question is, how is this really known? And then we go back to, well, what is it based on that we've said the sea level used to be a lower level before, and whatever that other information was, that's the source information, whether that happens to be the newspaper or journal or something like that as a written record, or some other proxy record. So proxy records, again, in general, are non-written records. Thanks for watching.